Hi everyone, and welcome to part 2 of our three-part series of webinars on some of the new tools from Microsoft under the Power BI label. Last week we had a look at building dashboards with Power View. I thought it would be fun this week to have a look at blending data together. This is an area that a lot of organizations are getting into now, primarily mixing and blending their on-premise transactional data with other data sources, which are usually external, which can be things like public data. For example, you know, on the slide here, what I've said, the way I try to look at it is that on-premise data tells us what has happened, but not necessarily why it happened. A good example is quite a well-known example is obviously that retail sales, for example. Retail sales are down when it rains. On-premise data will tell us the value and the volume of sales, but it won't necessarily tell us why sales are down, looking at it in isolation. But as soon as we blend in public weather data based on matching by the date, by the area, and even possibly the time of day, we can actually start to look and see if there are patterns in the data, patterns in the behavior, especially the behavior of the shoppers. What this would allow us to do then is predict future sales based on future weather forecasts, and that might in turn inform us in terms of stock replenishment decisions, for example. There's obviously lots of different scenarios, and I think it's something that companies are now starting to get their head around, is that there's a lot of public data being made available now, improvements in the internet, improvements in communication link speeds allow us to download and utilize far greater volumes of data than we've had access to before. The government, for example, releases a lot of data into the public domain on a regular basis. The trick is obviously, one is knowing, you know, what you want to achieve and which data sets to access in order to enrich your local data, and then of course having the right tools to help you load that data, play with it, slice and dice it, mix it and match it with your own data to see whether it will give you the right outcomes that you're after. So there's two tools that we're going to be looking at today. One of them is, they both come under the Power BI, Microsoft Power BI label. One of them is Power Query. So Power Query is very much, I look at it as a very business-friendly data access tool. Some of you may already have played with PowerPivot, but I certainly think Power Query is a lot better in terms of its interface and its friendliness from a business user's perspective. It's currently still in preview mode, but it is very usable. It's an add-in to Excel. It contains a number of data cleanup functions, so you can trim data, you can replace values, as we'll be seeing in a minute. It includes a number of transformational functions as well. You can access multiple data sources, so there's a whole range of different databases that it supports, flat files, etc. But it's also got what we're going to be looking at today, two things. One is the online search, so the ability to access data that's in the public domain directly from Excel. And secondly, the ability to share queries through the Power BI data catalog. So when you build a query with Power Query, you're accessing one of your data sets. Let's say you slice that data, you take a particular, you filter it, take a particular slice of the data. You might want to publish that query then so that other users can get access to the same data more easily. So we'll have a look at that as well. PowerPivot, this is obviously a tool that you might, some of you I'm sure already played with. It's been around for quite a while now. It's more of a data modeling tool. It does also allow you to import data in the same way Power Query does, but it's more, you need to know where that data is, whereas with Power Query you can actually search for the data. Again, it's an add-in for Excel. It is part of Excel, and it's even available in Excel 2010, unlike Power Query. It contains an in-memory tabular database engine, so it's very fast, and it can process millions of rows of data, which an Excel spreadsheet can only hold up to about 1 million rows. PowerPivot can handle millions of rows, so you can effectively then start to pivot and aggregate millions of rows within Excel. It contains a DAX formulae language, so you can actually build things like KPIs, calculated fields, measures, etc. And it does allow us to blend data from multiple sources. So we're basically going to use Power Query to find the data, and then we're going to load the data into a data model in PowerPivot, as you'll see. So we're going to start with a very simple theory. We're going to use data from the UK Land Registry. Now this is publicly available data. However, I've got it running in a database on my laptop. So for all intents and purposes, the Land Registry data, let's just pretend that that is my on-premise data. Okay, and then we're going to use some public data as well. So the theory we're trying to prove is that affluent areas vote Conservative and poorer areas vote Labour. And we're going to do that by looking at house sale data over a period of 2006 to the end of 2009. Now, the house price data doesn't contain anything about political party affiliation. So based on my on-premise data, I have no idea which areas have elected a Conservative MP and which ones have elected a Labour MP or Liberal Democrat. So what we're going to do is we're going to blend in data, public data, so we're going to have to search for it, find it, and load it and blend it in. That gives us that match. And we'll use the what I do have in the on-premise data is the constituency. So we're going to use constituency as the matching field. So let me just escape out of my PowerPoint slides and go straight over to Excel. Hopefully the latency is not too bad for you. Just bear with me 1 second while I just check that there aren't any. I would appreciate it if you could save any questions till the end of the meeting. There will be time. This is probably actually a shorter session than last week, so there will definitely be time for questions. So I'm going to go straight to Power Query. So Power Query and PowerPivot both are add-ins. They both appear on top in Excel on the ribbon. So I'll go straight to Power Query. There we go. And the first thing I'm going to do is an online search. And I'm going to search for list of MPs 2010, which I think is when the last election was. So, and I'm going to filter for just public data. So this is a feature of Power Query, the ability to search online. And it's brought back a number of results, and I can actually preview these results by just hovering over. So this particular one does have constituency, but it's not quite what I'm after. And we can look at the second one. It's got constituency, but it still doesn't have what I'm after. The third one, however, I already know does, which is the party of the notional incumbent before the election, which is why I've chosen to only go up to 2010, because this also contains whether the parliamentary seat changed or not in that election. So that column, the party of notional incumbent, is exactly what I'm after to match the data that I have. So the first thing I'm going to do is edit that data source. So what it's done is in the background it's actually found a Wikipedia article containing a table of data that I'm after, and it's now basically gone out to the cloud and it's loading that data into the Power Query window. So it's loaded the data. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to have a quick look at the political party list, and what I can see immediately is there is some bad data in here. There's Labour and Labour Party, and there's Conservative and Conservative Party. So I want to conform that data. So what I'm going to do is I've selected the column, and I'm going to click on here. So these are all our transformational type functions. There are more functions than I'm going to go through today in Power Query. So I'm just going to use a few of them to demonstrate how we can blend the data. First thing I'm going to do is choose the replace values function, and I'm going to look for Conservative Party, and I'm going to replace it with Conservative. So I just want the one word, and I'll say OK to that. And then I'm going to do the same thing again. Select my field first, just to make sure. So I'll do the same thing again, but this time do Labour Party. Replace it with Labour, and say OK to that. And when we drop the list down now, hopefully, yep, we can only see Conservative, and we can only see Labour. I'm going to deselect everything except Conservative, Labour, and Liberal Democrats, and say OK to that. And that's it. That's as much as I want to do. So I'm just in terms of this particular data set. So what I'm going to do is just give it a name, constituency affiliation. And down here I've got a couple of choices at the bottom. One is to load the data to a worksheet in Excel where I can see it. The other is to load it straight to my PowerPivot data model. That's the one I'm going to go with, which I've set as my default. So I'll click Apply and Close. So at this point, it's now going to load all of the data into my PowerPivot model. So it's just we'll just let it do that for a minute. Shouldn't take too long because there's only 621 rows. Right, that's done. So now I want to get, so that's my public data loaded. You can still see it gives you a little preview there. What I want to do now is I want to go back to Power Query and load my on-premise data. Now, what I've done is I've already pre-saved a shared query into the online data catalog. So I'm going to do an online search, but this time I'm going to change it to property, and I'm going to say just show me organization data, and there it is. So this, if I preview it, this is basically a list of, it's an aggregate, the data is pre-aggregated by year, by price band. Okay, so each property that's sold has been allocated a price band. The constituency within which the property falls, because remember each property has a postcode in my database, and the number of properties sold and the total value of the sales. So it's pre-aggregated, so all I need to do now in this case is say load. So this is effectively me going out to the cloud to use a shared query that is actually accessing my on-premise data. With this scenario, I do need to be connected to my corporate network. Okay, so the data itself is not in the cloud. My on-premise data is on-premise. It's not in the cloud. So it's important to make that distinction. All that's sitting in the cloud and the Power BI tenant is the shared query, which I'd saved before this session. So I've now got both my data sets loaded into the PowerPivot model. So all we need to do is go over to PowerPivot now and click on the Manage button. And that brings up PowerPivot, and we should see our two tables. Okay, so this is our tabular view, so we can see the actual data. So this is our constituency affiliation table that came from Wikipedia. So here's all the data. And this is our on-premise data in the property constituency 2006 to 2010 table. And I'm just going to do a little bit of formatting here so that when we actually visualize this data, it's all nicely formatted with commas to separate the thousands. That's done, so that's all I need to do there. Now we're going to switch into down here on the bottom right, we're going to switch into the diagrammatic view. And what we're going to do is, here's our two tables again. So this is the on-premise one, and this is the public data one. We're going to join the tables simply by dragging constituency on top of constituency. So joining the two fields, this effectively creates our join between the two tables. Done. So at this point, I can click on the pivot table button, and that's going to switch back to Excel. I'm going to say use the existing worksheet, and this is going to create a pivot table based on my two data sets joined up. And what we're going to do first of all to try and answer the questions we asked earlier is we're going to take the year and we're going to put that in drop that in our rows. Standard pivot table functionality in Excel. We could do this in Power View, which we used last week, but I want to concentrate more on what Power Query and Power Pivot can do, so I'm just using a base pivot table. We're going to use the volume of sales, the number of houses sold, as our measure. And across the top, we're going to put our political party. Okay, we can see immediately we have got 19,000 blank values. Now blank, they don't have a political party associated with them. Haven't got time to work out why at this point, so I'm just going to filter them out for now in the pivot table and just keep our main three political parties. Now I'm going to put a simple chart onto the page. Just a standard sort of bar chart somewhere. Where has it gone? Hello? Okay, that didn't seem to come. Let's try that again. Oh, there it is. Right, sorry, it was just building up. There we go. Right, so here's our chart. One of the things I'm going to, now immediately what we can see is there isn't a massive difference between, let's make labor red, their favorite color. There we go. We'll hopefully turn red in a second. Let's try again. There we go. So Conservatives blue, Labour red. Let's make the Liberal Democrats gold. There we go. Right, it's just a slight delay in changing the color. Okay, so what we can see immediately is that the difference in the volume of sales between Conservative-held areas and Labour-held areas isn't actually that great, especially when you look at 2009. Now, what you notice straight away also is that 2007 was the peak of the property boom, and then the crash came in, and basically you can see the immediate dip in sales in 2008, followed by 2009, and you'd obviously see that build up over time again. So this is all very well, but what we actually, that doesn't answer our original question. So what I'm going to do to help answer the question is I'm going to insert a slicer on our pivot table, and I'm going to slice by price band. So if you remember, this was a field we'd put in earlier, and this is a field that I put into my little property data warehouse that is derived. It's not in the original data. These are price bands that I have chosen to view the data by. So those are built up in my data warehouse. So I'm not building them up in PowerPivot or Power Query. They are there in the warehouse for everyone to use. If I build them in my PowerPivot model, then they're only there for me to use until I publish it. And other people can't actually make use of them in their own models then. So let's look at the low end of the market from 0 to £100,000. And immediately we can see most of the sales are in Labour-held areas. Okay, we can still see the dip, and that's fine. We know why that's occurred. Now if we look at the million plus side of the market, immediately we can see it's Conservative-held areas that have done well. If we look at the bands individually, so 0 to 100,000, 100 to 2,000, now immediately, so from 100 to 2,000 we can see that Conservative-held areas are back in the game. From 200 to 300,000, we're already way past the average property price. The average property price for the UK is somewhere around 150 upwards. So we've passed the sort of average mark. 300 to 500, now we're sort of into the, we're into London property prices now at the sort of low end of the London property market. So again, Conservatives pretty much a 50%, almost 50% increase on Labour. And that story sort of continues pretty much as we get into the luxury section of the market. Okay, let me switch back to the slides. So, in summary, these are great tools to prove a theory or hypothesis and to assess the value proposition of a data set. So if somebody sends you a data set, you don't necessarily want to wait 5 weeks to find out if that data set is useful, because you have to wait for your data warehouse people to load it into the warehouse so you can use it, only to find that it's not actually that useful. You want tools that can basically allow you to get that data in, blend it with your on-premise data, and see if it answers the questions that you're trying to get answers to. Great way to offer users access to on-premise and public data. So it's a nice way friendly way for users to search for data and then blend it. Another area that is obviously of interest to a lot of companies is accessing social media data. There are some hooks into Facebook at the moment. So if you have a corporate Facebook account, you can actually, with Power Query, you can actually hook into that account, download your followers, download some of the interactions that occur, and then slice and dice and analyze that. Ultimately, yes, the ability to embrace and enrich your on-premise data with other data sets albeit from other companies, be it from the public domain, could actually end up making the difference between success and failure. Now, just before I open up the floor to questions, just a couple of event reminders. The third and final part in this series of webinars is next week at same time, 1 p.m. on Thursday next week. I'm going to be showing you Power Map. So we'll be looking at a little bit of geospatial data visualization, data analysis, geodata for the masses. The reason is it's all very easy to do in Power Map. We'll look at some examples and we'll build a demo. And now, because we're doing this as a webinar, I'm probably not going to run any of the videos that I would normally run in a session like this with Power Map to show you the output. I will have some screenshots, and what I'll do is we'll point you to, we'll send you some links to examples that are on YouTube that we've done. And lastly, in terms of announcements, on June the 9th, IM Group are hosting we're holding a half-day seminar at Microsoft's offices in Victoria, I think. We're going to be covering a number of topics around data management. We'll be looking at BI in the cloud. Be looking at integrated big data platforms, so Microsoft's they called it analytics platform now. I'll be doing a session on some of the visualization stuff, along with looking at something that we won't be covering in the webinars. So I'll be covering the natural language Q&A facility, the natural language query stuff that's in Power BI, which is really very good. There'll be a session on data strategy, quality and governance, and of course an opportunity to network and meet your peers over lunch. So without further ado, I would like to open the floor to any questions. I can't see that anyone has asked any questions yet, but please do, if you want to ask a question, please do type it into the question box and I will do my best to answer it. If you're desperate to get back to your lunch, please feel free. Thank you very much for attending. It's been a pleasure. I hope it's been useful for you, and I hope to see some of you on June the 9th, if not online next week. So, any questions? Does this link to Twitter? Good question. I wish it did. It definitely links to Facebook. Twitter, not yet, but I think watch this space, because there is definitely some stuff going on in the event streaming area. So Microsoft is definitely looking at event streaming, and I think Twitter will feature in there. I joined late. Has this been recorded? Yes, all of these sessions are recorded. Last week's will be available soon, hopefully by the end of this week. So yes, this session is being recorded, so we will send you an email once that's done. You're welcome. Maximum data volumes. Good question. Maximum data volumes. Well, Excel, if you're bringing data into Excel, then obviously there's a limit of 1 million rows. PowerPivot, you have to be careful, because it's tempting to sort of, you will hear a lot of messages out there saying that PowerPivot can handle millions of rows, and it can. I've loaded 18 million rows into PowerPivot. It can be a bit time consuming if you're not doing any specific optimizations for that. I would avoid, pick on the fields that you want rather than just bringing everything in, because the narrower the field set is, the more rows you can load. You do need to, it can be quite memory hungry when you get into millions of rows, so bear that in mind as well. The best, if you really are truly wanting to handle large data volumes, I would still say, other than for exploratory analysis and one-offs, stick with your data warehouse. Keep the data in the data warehouse, extract the slices that you need in order to answer the questions you're trying to answer. Let me just see what other questions are coming up. Just bear with me. Are there only specific sites you can get data from? Which ones would you recommend? Okay, there's a number. I didn't cover it in detail, but Power Query can access, for example, OData feeds. So you can publish your own data as OData feeds. You can access external data feeds if they're published as OData. So you may have some partners where you have a VPN link to them, where you could access no data feed that they might be publishing securely. There's lots of different ways to get hold of data. The ones that are built in to Power Query seem to be primarily Wikipedia, but there's no reason why you can't supplement the feeds with other data sources. And let me scroll down. Can you apply security by entity level depending on user roles? You certainly can within your warehouse, within the underlying data warehouse, and that would then propagate through the tools. In terms of if you published one of these models that contain multiple entities, you'd effectively be publishing the workbook to the Microsoft BI tenant, the private cloud tenant. In that scenario, no, it's not really. There's no different security between the various entities within the model. So it really comes down to making sure that you're publishing data that you think that people do have access to. Once you publish that model, you can secure the model, but not necessarily the individual components of the data within it. Next question. How do you add Power Query into Excel? Right, so if you search for, if you do a Google search for Microsoft Power Query and download, you'll get the page where the latest version of Power Query is available. It should be one of the first hits. It is updated on roughly on a monthly basis, so make sure you have the latest. Make sure you sort of keep an eye out and always get the latest one. A good place to keep up with, I think I'm still sharing my screen, so a good place to keep up with Power BI is the Power BI blog. So if you Google Power BI blog, you'll see it's the MSDN blogs. It's the first hit that comes up. And whenever there's a new feature or a new version of software that's been released, you'll usually see it here. So for example, here's an article on May updates for Power Map. And I'd expect there'll be another article within the next couple of weeks regarding June updates to Power Query. So it's a download. Power Query is a download and an install. Any other questions? If not, I think we'll call the session to a close. Thanks very much to all of you for listening. Hope to see you all soon. Feel free to keep in touch with us by email. I do have some contact details which are on the screen right now. So thanks very much. Bye-bye.